It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to share some information about the California Whistleblower Hotline and the California State Auditor's Whistleblower Program. My name is Lane Hendricks, and I'm a manager in the Investigations Division for the California State Auditor, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Becca Clement, one of our senior investigators who also has a lot of knowledge and experience regarding receiving and investigating whistleblower complaints. We've both been with the State Auditor for many years, and we're happy to share with you today some information about the Whistleblower Hotline and the California State Auditor's Whistleblower Program. Before we jump into our discussion on the Whistleblower Program, I wanted to walk you through a brief scenario, and this is a scenario that perhaps you or other state employees may have encountered at some point during your careers. So imagine with me, if you will, that you have a coworker named Gary. This is Gary, and you get along well with Gary. You've worked with him for a number of years. And in addition to his state job, Gary is a chef, and he owns a catering business that he operates on nights and weekends. No big deal, right? It's not improper for him to have a personal business as long as it doesn't conflict with his state job, and as long as he does it on his own time. Now, you've known about Gary's catering business for a few years, and you haven't been concerned. But lately, you've noticed some changes in Gary's behavior. He seems to always be on his cell phone talking to customers about events that he'll be catering later that night or on the weekend. And when you walk by his desk, it's not uncommon for you to see documents on his computer screen that clearly are related to his business. And you've even started to find documents on the printer that seem to be promotional material related to the business. Finally, you notice that Gary has started to disappear from the office for hours at a time, especially on Fridays. And you have access to his timesheets, and because of your, you have access to his timesheets because of your job duties, and you can see that he's not accounting for these absences. And his job duties don't require him to leave the office for any reason. So based on your observations, you're pretty convinced that Gary is abusing state resources to operate his catering business. So you ask yourself, what should I do? Should I report it to Gary's supervisor? Will Gary find out that I turned him in? What if Gary's supervisor seems to already know about the abuse but hasn't addressed it? These are all questions that might go through someone's mind if they encounter this situation. And it may be difficult to decide what to do. One option that state employees have, and even members of the general public for that matter, is to file a whistleblower complaint with the California State Auditor's Office when they become aware of state employees committing improprieties in the workplace. So hopefully, after today's presentation, you'll have a better understanding of what that process entails and how it works. So here's a quick glance at what we'll cover in this presentation today. We'll first give an overview of the State Auditor's Office and what our authority entails. We'll then discuss how individuals can file a complaint with our office and how we handle those complaints. And finally, we'll review the positive impact that whistleblower complaints can have on state government. So let me turn the time over to Becca, who will cover some important aspects of the State Auditor's Office.
Thank you, Lane. To start us off, let's get to know you guys a little bit better with our first poll question. Number 1, how familiar are you with the California State Auditor's investigation of whistleblower complaints? A, not familiar at all. B, slightly familiar. C, moderately familiar. D, very familiar. And E, extremely familiar. We'll give you guys a second. Thank you for your responses. It looks like most of you probably don't have too much experience with our office, and so hopefully today we'll be able to give you guys a little bit more information to help you. We wanted to give you, first off, a brief overview of our agency. The California State Auditor's Office is led by a state auditor. Our current state auditor, Elaine Howell, has been at the helm here for over 16 years. The state auditor is nominated by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and the governor extends the final appointment. Our office is most well known for, well, you guessed it, audits. After all, it is in our name. We do many different types of audits: financial, federal compliance, performance, and state high-risk audits. Our office also does local government high-risk audits as well. However, Lane and I are here today from the Investigations Division. It is our division, which is completely separate from audits, that administers and oversees the Whistleblower Program. Our division processes more than 1,000 calls or inquiries each year. All right, so what gives us the authority to administer the Whistleblower Program? It is the Whistleblower Protection Act. Everything that we do is governed by this act. It is our, for lack of a better term, our Constitution. If you're interested in reading the Act, it is located at Section 8547 of the California Government Code. But generally, the Act enables individuals to file a complaint with our office, and it provides for certain protections for whistleblowers, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. It also allows us to receive complaints, investigate them, and at the end of the day, issue a public report on what we find. An important limitation to note is that our office does not have enforcement authority. The authority to take actions against the improper acts remain with the hiring authority. However, even though we don't have enforcement authority, the vast majority of departments do take actions on our recommendations. And for those who choose not to, our office actually prepares a separate report pointing out the departments who haven't fulfilled our recommendations after 1 year. But really, the departments normally do take action on our recommendations. Now that we've briefly covered the Act at a high level, let's get into some of the details. We're going to start by talking about who the Act allows us to investigate. Let's begin with the following poll question for the audience. So, which group of employees cannot be investigated by the California State Auditor? A, executive branch employees. B, judicial branch employees. C, legislative branch employees. D, CSU employees. And E, UC employees. All right, let's go ahead and share our results. Got a couple more seconds there. So it looks like, you guys got a little bit of a hint there, but the correct answer is legislative branch employees. So before we get to the list of people that we cannot investigate, which is what that question covered, let's quickly cover who we can investigate. So as we show here on the slide, the Act gives us jurisdiction to investigate California state employees who work in the executive branch. For example, those include employees that work for the DMV, CHP, or Caltrans, just as examples. And then these state departments are all under the direction of the governor, hence executive branch employees. We can also investigate judicial branch employees and UC and CSU employees. Unfortunately, we do not have jurisdiction over members of the legislature, such as our senators and representatives, as well as our local government employees, like our city's mayor. These individuals are outside of our jurisdiction, as are nonprofit and private entities. So we've covered who we can investigate, but we haven't yet discussed what we can investigate. The Act establishes that we can investigate improper governmental activities. We like to simply refer to these as IGAs in our office. The Act defines an IGA as any activity by a state agency or employee during the performance of the employee's duties that, 1, violates any state or federal law or regulations, include things like corruption or fraud or bribery, violates an executive order of the government, a California rule of court, any policy or procedure from the administrative manual or the state contracting manual, and lastly, is economically wasteful, involves gross misconduct, incompetency, or inefficiency. You can see here that the first two categories here are very criteria-driven. It's something written down in some book, right? It's a law or regulation that's been codified. The third is less definable. For example, we may get an allegation where a State Department may be expending a large sum for some project, and although it may not be in violation of any specific written law or regulation, we might look at that situation and still say, you know what, that is a waste of state funds and therefore an IGA. Let's move on to our next poll question, please. All right. Which of the following is not an example of what the California State Auditor investigates? Theft and embezzlement. B, conflicts of interest. C, wasteful decisions. Or D, retaliation. So let's look and see what our results are. It looks like most of you guessed retaliation and also a little bit of conflicts of interest. The correct answer is retaliation, and we'll explain in just a few minutes why. Our office investigates a wide range of allegations, but we first wanted to share with you a few of the most common ones. Let's start with theft and embezzlement. This one is pretty self-explanatory. These allegations involve state employees stealing directly from the state. Money, cars, all of those things. Pretty cut and dry. Second one, misuse of state resources. This can involve the misuse of any state resource, such as a state computer, copier, car, cell phone. For example, Gary, as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, was misusing his state computer and copier to run his private business. Time and attendance. We're not talking about Jane Smith, who came in 15 minutes late one time 3 years ago. We're talking about people who repeatedly and flagrantly abuse their time over a longer period of time. Improper payments. These include allegations where the state has made improper payments that were unwarranted. For example, a State Department may have paid an employee a significant pay differential when the employee was not eligible to receive it. Travel claim fraud. These can include state employees who make false claims on their TECs. Maybe they said they went down to San Diego and submitted a claim for it when they never did. Or create fraudulent invoices for reimbursement. Conflicts of interest. Now, this is something we can investigate, and this can involve state employees who have participated in decisions in which they had a financial interest in. So, for example, this could be someone who holds stock in a company that he is making, maybe possibly contracting decisions on. Conflict of interest can also involve a designated state employee who failed to publicly disclose their financial interests as well. Contracting fraud. This type of allegation can involve state employees colluding together for bid rigging or kickbacks. And wasteful decisions. This one can really run the gamut. It could be anything a State Department or state employee might do that we consider to be a waste of state funds. Now, that's just a small subset of the most common allegations we investigate. There are many more, but hopefully this gives you a little taste of what we do. Going back to our poll questions, we mentioned how there are issues we do not investigate. Retaliation, which was the correct answer, is the first one listed here. Retaliation is something we do not investigate here at the State Auditor's Office. These complaints are handled by other entities, which I will mention in just a couple slides. The other areas we don't investigate are discrimination, sexual harassment, disputes with supervisors, and disciplinary actions. For all of these, it is important to note that the reason we are unable to investigate these types of complaints is because our office isn't able to act as an advocate for our complainants. Our client is California, and our goal is to promote good business. As a result, we can't advocate on the behalf of individuals. Our mandate is to help California be better. So we've talked about who the Act allows us to investigate and what we are able to investigate. Now I want to discuss the how. The Act mandates confidentiality. As a result, we never disclose the identity of a whistleblower except to law enforcement conducting a criminal investigation. We use extreme caution and conduct our investigation in such a way that we protect the identities of the complainants and confidential sources. We really bend over backwards to make sure this is the case. Because we want to protect the integrity of our investigation, we don't keep complainants updated on the progress of our investigations. Although we may call you if we need additional information, we will not be able to provide updates on how the investigation is going. Again, the state of California is our client. Lastly, in case you're worried that people might find out you submitted a complaint using a Public Records Act request, Don't fear, because our investigations are not subject to public disclosure. Now, what happens if your employer finds out you submitted the complaint? Maybe you told a coworker you thought you could trust that you filed a complaint, but then your coworker told your boss, and now you're being retaliated against. What can you do? Here's a poll question to get us started. Here's our question. State employees, including University of California and California State University employees, may report retaliation to the State Personnel Board. True or false? All right. So it looks like most of you thought the answer was true. Now, the correct answer is actually false, and I apologize because this is a little bit of a trick question because only certain state employees can file a claim with SPB. Let's move on to the next slide. Don't worry. Regardless of what type of state employee you are still protected. The Act protects whistleblowers from reprisal, retaliation, threats, and similar acts by any state employee. If you are an executive or a judicial branch employee and you feel that your employer is retaliating against you for filing a whistleblower complaint, you can file a claim with the State Personnel Board. However, if you're a university employee, the process is a little bit different. University employees are required to file their claim directly with the hiring authority. Now that we've talked about what our office does generally and the authority we have in investigating whistleblower complaints, I'm going to pass the baton back to Lane to discuss how you can submit a complaint to our office.
Thanks, Becca. So if you've been wondering how one goes about filing a whistleblower complaint, we'll talk about that right now. So first and foremost, there's the hotline. And the number for that is 1-800-952-5665. Now, if you're like me, there's nothing more annoying than calling a 1-800 number and listening to a recorded message and then jumping through this series of menus. And then if you're lucky, after a long time, you might actually talk to a real life person. Well, that's not the case with the Whistleblower Hotline. If you call our number during regular business hours, it's going to be answered by a real live person. And the only exception to that really is if all the lines are busy, and that's pretty rare. Now, unfortunately, that means that even those individuals who we would prefer not to speak with, there's some disturbed individuals out there who any chance they can get to, talk to somebody, a real live person, they're going to take advantage of that. So before you call, please keep in mind that we're not 411. We will not give you legal advice, and we will not give you love advice either. Now, through the mail is also a way in which a lot of people submit a complaint to our office. The address is P.O. Box 1019, Sacramento, California, 95812. And many individuals like to submit their complaints by mail because it allows them to thoroughly explain the issue that they're bringing forth, their complaint. And sometimes they're quite complex, and so they can, in a lot of detail, explain all the different aspects of their complaint. And it's also easy for them to submit documents or evidence along with their complaint. Now, for those individuals who do choose to submit a complaint to our office by mail, it's very important that they're very clear and legible if they're not typewritten. So please do not submit complaints written in crayon. Please do not submit complaints that would require a hieroglyphics consultant to interpret them. You'd really be amazed at some of the stuff we receive sometimes. Now, the third way in which someone can file a complaint with our office is online through a portal right on our website. And that address is www.auditor.ca.gov/hotline. And more individuals are starting to prefer to submit their complaints through the website. When we receive a complaint over the hotline wherever we receive it, it's important for us, we begin to evaluate it. And it's like putting together a puzzle. And we need to get as much information as we can to piece that puzzle together. And so the analysts who answer the hotline, they're very well trained, and they're going to ask a lot of questions of the individuals who call in to try to get as much information as they can. They'll ask questions like, who's involved? If we go back to our initial example of Gary and his catering business, they're going to want to know, who's Gary? How long has he been in his position? What's his contact information? Who does he report to? And what's that person's contact information? And so forth. The analysts will also ask questions like, what's the issue, obviously? What's the impropriety? And try to get as many details as they can about that. They'll also want to find out if what specific law or regulation is being violated. They'll also try to find out where this is all taking place. In the example of Gary and his catering business, where is Gary's office located? And within the office, where is Gary's desk or cubicle located? Does his catering business have a separate location? If so, where's that? They'll also try to find out when this took place. Was this a one-time thing? Does it happen every week, every day? Is it ongoing? And what's the frequency? And also, how long has it been happening? Questions like that. They'll also ask you the question how. How do you know about it? Did you observe this directly? Or maybe you heard about it from someone else. And that's important information for us to have. They're also going to try to find out why this was able to occur. Maybe there's some sort of control weakness, or perhaps the supervisor is allowing it to happen, things of that nature. Now, there are two other key things that our analysts will try to elicit from the callers as well. The first is there any documentary evidence? Does the complainant have documents that they can provide to us to support the allegation? Or perhaps, maybe they can help explain what documents exist and how we can get access to them if they don't have access themselves. And lastly, they're going to ask if there are any witnesses. Who else knows about this? And how can we get in touch with those individuals? Now, it's also critical to understand that if you submit a complaint by mail or online, our analyst isn't going to be able to physically ask you those questions. So it's important that you include those details as well. Now, can someone submit a complaint to us anonymously? Absolutely, of course. And we would never prevent anyone from doing so. But I do want to point out that when we know who the complainant is, it does add some additional credibility to the complaint, and it also allows us to get back in contact with that individual if we have follow-up questions, if we need additional information. So in other words, it can help us when investigating the complaint. There's nothing worse than getting a complaint about some serious fraudulent activity, and we can't do anything about it because we hardly got any information and it came from an anonymous complainant. Let me give you an example. Some of the larger state departments have tens of thousands of employees, right? So if we were to get an anonymous complaint from an individual about one of these departments, and that person told us, there's a contract manager in the Los Angeles area doing something wrong. Okay, well now we've narrowed our subject pool down to several hundred employees, right? And then say they provided additional information. They told us that person's receiving kickbacks from a contractor in exchange for overlooking some shortcuts that the contractor's taking. That would be something we'd really be interested in looking into and investigating. And say they also told us, everybody knows about this, just ask anybody. Well, great. Now we've narrowed our witness pool down to several thousand employees. And if that's from an anonymous complainant and we don't have any way to get more information, it makes it very difficult for us to look into that. But let me reiterate an important fact that Becca covered, and that is that the Whistleblower Protection Act requires that we protect a complainant's identity, and we take that very, very seriously. Are we still able to look into anonymous complaints? Yes, of course. And we've actually reported on many anonymous complaints in the past. So we're certainly open to as many anonymous complaints as we get. Let me turn the time back over to Becca. She's going to discuss a little bit about what we do after we receive a complaint.
All right. Now, let's move on to talk about the investigative process. You submitted your complaint. Now, what happens with it? So, as Lane mentioned, anyone can submit a complaint. It could be a state employee, it could be a totally random person off the street, or it could even be an angry coworker with an axe to grind. Therefore, we go through a preliminary evaluation process for all the complaints we receive to determine if the allegation is even occurring, if it's likely occurring. This usually involves calling witnesses the complainant has identified to seek corroboration of the allegation as described. And sometimes we pull a few records to see if we can independently verify some of the information that has been provided. Sometimes, though, the complainant doesn't provide us the essential details to help us corroborate the allegation. And if it is an anonymous one, we have no way of contacting them to get these details that we need. So in scenarios such as these, if we don't have enough to go on, we are unable to move the case any further. That is why it's important to provide those details that Lane discussed in the last section, such as providing witnesses and documentary evidence and, the who, what, where, why, all of those things. That's why it's really important to make sure that you list as much information as possible to help us get past that preliminary evaluation phase. Once it does get past that phase, if we decide to undertake an investigation, it generally includes the following tasks, and this is listed in no particular order. But first, gather documentation and other evidence. We interview witnesses, supervisors, as well as subjects, and we also analyze data and all other gathered evidence. Now let's touch on that gathered evidence part by moving on to our next poll question. Which type of records is the California State Auditor's Office able to access? First, timesheets, official personnel files, attorney-client privileged communications, contracts, A, B, and D, or all of the above. All right, let's go ahead and share those results. Get your answers in the last few seconds. All right, so it looks like most of you guys selected A, B, and D. Actually, the correct answer is F, all of the above. Does that come as a surprise to you? Well, that is thanks to what we call, and let's move on to the next slide, stand and choose authority. What does that mean? Well, it essentially means that if you, as a state employee in whatever capacity you work, can see or have access to a document, I, as a representative of the State Auditor's Office, have the same access to that document. So this includes pretty much everything. Official personnel files, emails, confidential or privileged documents. This is a powerful investigative tool for us in helping us uncover the truth. So at the end of the day, still comes back to confidentiality. Our number one edict is to protect the identity of the complainant. As a result, we will bend over backwards to make sure we protect the complainant. If a document is something only you have access to, and giving us that document might result in identifying you as a whistleblower, we will find another way to get what we need. Lane will now discuss the impact our investigations have made.
One of the things we wanted to emphasize today is that the complaints we receive and the investigations we conduct, they have a true significant impact on improving state government. After we conduct an investigation and when we substantiate that an improper governmental activity has occurred, we'll issue a report. Initially, we send the report to the departments involved, and we include our recommendations so that they can address and begin to correct the issues that we identified. As Becca mentioned earlier, we don't have enforcement authority, and so we can't take the corrective action. However, departments certainly can, and like Becca said, they generally do a pretty good job of following our recommendations. And then ultimately, we issue public reports. And in those reports, we keep confidential the identities of the state employees involved as required by law. And we post the reports on our website. And that is www.auditor.ca.gov/reports. And we also distribute those reports to the governor, the legislature, other high-ranking officials, and to the press. Speaking of the press, they generally do a nice job of highlighting some of our investigations. And we thought we'd share a couple of examples of investigations that did receive some press coverage and appeared on local news broadcasts. The first case we'll call the golfer. Now, I'm a golfer myself, and I think I would have gotten along quite well with this individual, except for the fact that he was golfing when he was supposed to be working. So as noted, we found 55 occasions when this state engineer was out on the golf course instead of getting his work done. Interestingly enough, he really didn't see a problem with all this. Now, making matters worse, his supervisor didn't do an adequate job of making sure that his employees were where they were supposed to be. Now, before the department could take any disciplinary action against our golfer friend and his supervisor, they both retired. Now, this may seem like they got off easy, and in a way that may be true, but it is a positive outcome because they're no longer working for the state. The second example we'll mention that was highlighted by local news outlets was a case involving a wasteful purchase of more than 50 full-size vans. Now, this particular department spent nearly $1 million on these vans and then left them parked, literally untouched, for almost 3 years. Now, obviously, they couldn't go back and reverse this wasteful purchase from several years prior, but they did begin using the vans, and they were able to get rid of other vehicles that they no longer needed. Now, the value of the improper governmental activities that we've identified over the years through our investigations is quite substantial, and it might actually shock you. Thanks to the efforts of whistleblowers, and as a result of our investigations, we've been able to identify more than $500 million worth of improper governmental activities since 1993. Now, that number is even more significant when you take into consideration the fact that we often make recommendations to the departments to recoup any losses to the state. So if somebody embezzles funds, we recommend that they go after those funds. If somebody's overpaid, we're going to recommend that they try to get those funds back. We also will often recommend that departments take appropriate disciplinary action against the employees involved. Now, a lot of disciplinary action, it starts out at a lower level, especially for first-time offenders. So you'll notice some of the categories up there like reprimands, pay reductions, suspensions without pay. But I do want to point out that the second largest category on this chart is job terminations or resignations and retirements. And so that hopefully means that we are getting rid of some of the quote-unquote bad apples in state service. The impact that whistleblowers can have is significant, and it can really influence state government in a positive way. So if you've ever found yourself in a situation, or if you find yourself in that situation where you've observed something at work that you know is wrong and probably illegal, and you're not quite sure what to do, one option that you might want to consider is contacting the Whistleblower Hotline. That is our presentation for today, and we're happy to answer any questions you have at this point, and certainly feel free to reach out to us as well if you want to call the hotline. That number, once again, is 1-800-952-5665, or our general office number is 916-445-0255.
Okay, so at this point, Beck and I, we're available to answer any of your questions. So go ahead and use the chat feature to submit any questions you have at this point. All right, so the first question is discrimination based on a protected class and sexual harassment considered an IGA, an improper governmental activity? So those particular items, sexual harassment and discrimination, those are obviously illegal acts. However, our office is not equipped to investigate those type of complaints, and really the reason is we don't have enforcement authority. We can't come to some sort of resolution for those individuals. There are other entities that are already established that are better suited to investigate those type of complaints, where the final result can be a resolution or a remedy for the individual.
Great, thanks. Another question we have received is, does the department or employee get a chance at rebuttal before the report is released to the press and the public? Now, the department does get a chance to respond before anything is published. We do provide them with a copy of our report, and we ask them to get back to us in terms of any factual inaccuracies, and also allow them to provide a department response, which we then summarize and include with every chapter of our published reports. The employee does not typically get a chance at rebuttal. However, we do interview the subject, and we do give them an opportunity, once presented with the facts we've discovered, to kind of explain why they think our facts might not be accurate, and we're able to move forward at that point.
Another question we received, what about a rank-and-file employee who earned over $50,000 in 9 months in overtime? So I think the question that this individual is asking is that improper? And the answer to that is maybe. It certainly depends on whether the employee actually worked the overtime. And certainly if they were claiming overtime that they were not working, that certainly would be improper and something that we would be interested in investigating. If someone was actually working the overtime, it's probably not improper unless a good argument could be made that it was unnecessary. And that's maybe, that's kind of a challenging threshold to determine whether overtime was necessary or not. But that is something that we could look into if the allegation was that the overtime was wasteful.
Another question we have here, do you record hotline phone calls? The answer is no, we do not. However, we do document or record what we discuss in writing. We take notes about what you told us, the witnesses, all the information you've told us so that we can move forward. We don't actually record the phone calls itself, though. We have a question here to show screen number 30 again. We can go ahead and do that while we answer some of these other questions as well.
Here's another question we received. In the case of an employee golfing 55 days and then retiring, can the state auditor still recommend the money being reimbursed, even if the employee retired? So the state auditor can certainly recommend that it seek reimbursement, the department seek reimbursement for improper payments received, even after the employee's retired in some instances. And that's certainly up to the State Department on how they would go about doing that. But in some cases, a department could initiate collection efforts on someone who was a state employee but has since retired or even resigned.
Okay, another question. What happens when you get questioned if you are the one who reported it? Can you deny it? I'm assuming what you mean here is if your employer has asked you if you filed the complaint.
So let me jump in here. It actually would be very inappropriate for an employer to start questioning employees about whether they had submitted a whistleblower complaint. So you could say something like, I can't believe you're going around asking employees if they filed a whistleblower complaint, and it's really not appropriate for you to be asking employees in our office. if they filed a whistleblower complaint.
And then if your employer continues along that line of questioning, then yes, you can deny it. You don't have to tell them you submit a whistleblower complaint if you want to be anonymous. Whistleblowers have a right to submit a complaint completely anonymously. All right, we have another question here. When your office contacts a witness, what does the office tell the witness as to how they were provided with their contact information? Now, generally what we do is we call them and we say something like, hey, your name was given to us as a person who might be able to provide us with some additional information regarding an allegation we received. We usually ask them very generally, do you know anything about any improper acts that might be occurring? We might give them a subject like it might involve a time and attendance situation. And that's usually pretty much all the information we give them. We don't tell them that James Smith gave us your name or anything to that effect. We simply say your name came up as someone who might be able to help us with some information.
Okay, here's another question. Is it abuse to take a 2-week vacation as an exempt employee, check your email each day, and then claim it as a day worked and not use any vacation leave? Now that's an interesting question because exempt employees don't necessarily have a 40-hour work week requirement. They have to work until they get their job done, essentially. But we certainly have looked at situations like this in the past. If an employee is checking their email for literally just a few minutes each day and claiming that as a full day's work, we're probably going to have an issue with that.
Okay, another question here we have, it says, is it proper or legal for an employer to tell or identify a person who has filed a complaint to other employees? I would say that it's absolutely not proper or legal to do that. If that person feels like they're being retaliated against because of a complaint that they submitted, then they could definitely file a claim with the State Personnel Board and go through that process as we mentioned earlier in our webinar.
Okay, here's another question. Are you mandatory reporters if you know about possible misconduct, or do you need to wait for a formal complaint to be filed? So I'll answer that question in a couple ways. As far as if we're mandated to report to other entities like law enforcement, the answer is generally no. If we receive something that's serious in nature that we're not equipped to investigate, that needs to be forwarded to law enforcement, we will forward that information. And also, if we become aware of misconduct without a complaint being filed to our office, we certainly can take steps to look into that on our own without waiting for a whistleblower complaint from some outside entity to come into our office.
Another question here says, how do I contact the State Personnel Board if I feel I have been retaliated against? I'll just point you guys to their website here. It's www.spb.ca.gov/whistleblower/whistleblower.as as in Sam, P as in Paul, X. That web address will get you the information you need to file a complaint directly with them. Now, another question, should a complainant ask the witnesses if they can provide their contact information to the state auditor's office? The answer, I would say, is no, and here's why. To be honest with you, I wouldn't tell anyone I'm submitting a complaint. As we told you, we don't tell anyone who the identity is of our whistleblower. And really the only way anyone else can find out is if you tell them. So I don't think you need to do that. I think it's more of a protection for you to just not tell anyone you submitted a complaint, but give us their information, these witnesses, and we can go through that process that we described earlier to get the information we need to support your complaint.
Also, it can have an impact on our investigative work as well. The more people that become aware of a complaint submitted to our office, and the more people are talking about it, the more it can become kind of this rumor mill type of thing going around the office, and the more it can affect the integrity of our investigation. So it's best not to go around to potential witnesses and ask them, hey, can I give your information to the state auditor? We'll be able to reach out to them in a confidential way and get the information that we need. Okay, here's another question. Does your office investigate reports that are filed with an individual department? And I'm assuming you mean that if a whistleblower directly files a complaint with a specific department, do we get that notification? And the answer is no. Only if the department reaches out and tells us about it, or if the whistleblower calls us and tells us. That's really the only way we would find out about those type of complaints.
Great. So another question, how is it determined who the state auditor will contact at a state agency to conduct their own state auditor referred inquiries? Now, if we choose to ask the department to assist us in an investigation, we already have contacts established at each of the state departments to help us. Most often, those are the audit coordinators that the State Department has designated.
And, excuse me. And if we have information that those contacts are involved in some way in the complaint, then obviously we're not going to refer that matter to them. And generally in those situations, there won't be any type of request for assistance. We're going to be doing all of the work ourselves.
Okay, another question. What if I am aware of a coworker who is using state time to handle personal business, spending a lot of their state time on personal calls, that sort of thing, but I think the witnesses will be afraid to report what they have observed? What should I do? Well, what I would suggest is perhaps consider calling the Whistleblower Hotline and filing this complaint with us. Provide the information you do have. Now, for example, what I might suggest is making sure you list the witnesses you think would be most likely to help us, but also maybe you kept a little calendar or a log of all the times that you've seen your coworker on the phone. That you should provide that to us as well, and that can help us corroborate your allegation.
Okay, another question. Some agencies have their own internal ethics hotlines. When do we use the state auditor hotline as opposed to an internal hotline? Do the internal reports get shared with the state auditor? Can the state auditor access internal reports on previously reported issues as part of an investigation? So that was kind of a three-part question. So whether or not an individual decides to file a complaint internally or with us as an external entity, that's really going to be up to that individual. They're going to have to look at the situation and make their own decision on whether they feel comfortable making the complaint internally or if they prefer to make that complaint with our office. Certainly they could do it with both entities as well. And as far as whether that information gets shared with the state auditor, the answer is not automatically. Certainly, there's no automatic requirement that State Departments share whistleblower complaints with our office. And so, but as far as whether we can access those type of complaints if we were conducting an investigation, yes, we can. And our stand-in shoes authority allows us to access any state document that we believe is relevant to our review.
All right. Another question here. I had to get permission from my supervisor to take this training. Can this training be anonymous? And another question that I'm going to read out here because the answer kind of goes to both of them is, are the PDFs of the slides going to be made available? So just so you know, this presentation is going to be available on YouTube. So in the future, you won't need to get permission from your supervisor to listen to this information. You'll be able to just go online and view this webinar on YouTube. And similarly, if you just want to refer back to the slides later, that information will be available for you to reference on YouTube at any other later date. I think we have just two more questions here. I think Does the state auditor's office have a master list of all employees and their phone numbers? We do not. However, we do have a pretty good way of finding people's phone numbers if we need to. We have contacts in many different departments, so we're usually able to find numbers. But if you can provide it to us, that makes it much easier for us to contact witnesses to corroborate your allegation. And last question here we have, it says, if I give the state auditor's office documentary evidence that contains social security numbers and or addresses, will I get in trouble? Now, as we mentioned before, we have access to everything. We have access to employees' addresses and social security numbers. But really the best thing to do here is just to redact it before you send it, just to avoid any possible problems. So it's not like we don't have a right to that information. It just would be safer to exclude it before you send it.